I explained one time to Coach Saban, he said, well, you're going to flunk this guy. And I said, well, I'm going to put a very high risk grade on him. If the reward of having him outweighs the risk I'm telling you, then that's a decision you have to make. He said, well, you're putting it all on me. I said, well, that's why they're paying you millions. I said, I don't know how good the player is. I only can speak to what his health is. You have to put the whole package together and make a decision whether what I'm telling you is too restrictive or acceptable in terms of the quality of player you're going to get.
In 1985, I was a team priest for the University of Miami Hurricane football team in Miami. And that year, we had a new person on staff that I had never met before. But in that time, the person I'm going to introduce to you today has become one of the closest and best friends in my life. And I would tell you that there have been many decisions in my life that I've had to make personally, and without the guidance, direction, and confidence of the individual that I call one of the best friends you could ever have, I would be somewhat lost. And so today I would like to introduce you to Kevin O'Neill, formerly the head trainer of the University of Miami Hurricanes, later with the Dallas Cowboys, and still after that with the Miami Dolphins. And then later, he's going to tell you about his other experiences overseeing the training with the UFL. So, Kevin O'Neill.
Thank you for the glowing introduction, Leo. Appreciate.
What drew you to this career in this profession?
Well, I was pretty blessed. I was a sophomore in high school, and I had a coach that took an interest in me. And he liked me. He taught history. I had him for a teacher in class, and he also coached the sophomore football team.
Now, you're originally from Pittsburgh, right?
Right outside of Pittsburgh, the eastern suburbs called Penn Hills.
Okay.
And so I worked for him that sophomore season as a manager, and he took me over to meet the head athletic trainer at the high school. This is like 1968 or 69, and there weren't very many athletic trainers in high school in Pennsylvania at that time. But Penn Hills High School had just hired one. It was his first year. And so I was kind of fortunate enough to start to get to know him. And I went over to the high school from the school that I was in. So through Coach Roman, Greg Roman, he took me over there and introduced me to Tim Kerin, Kerin, Tim. And Tim was the head trainer at my high school through my graduation in 1972. And then he had set it up for me to go down and interview at the University of Pittsburgh in the fall of 72. And the first day that I walked in there was Tim. He had been hired there away from the high school during the summer.
What a blessing and a coincidence is that?
And so, it was a period of change for Pitt. Pitt, my first year there, we were 1-10. We were terrible. They went out and spent a bunch of money to hire a coach by the name of Johnny Majors to come in, and he was charged with turning that thing around. And in short course, we played for a national championship.
And it's a very, very demanding and challenging career to pursue because it requires a lot of intelligence and a lot of experience to even get better at what you're doing.
Well, put it this way. So, like, I had to make my mind up early on. If I was going to do this, I was spending 5 to 6 hours a day in the athletic training room after my classes were over.
Wow.
That doesn't count travel or other things. And so, my philosophy was, pay your fees and get your B's.
So after serving there at the University of Pittsburgh, what was your next step in your career?
Well, I looked, and at the time there were about 5 graduate programs that had a degree in athletic training as a master's, and one of them was a 1-year, 12-month condensed program. And, I've gone to school for a while, and I was ready to be done with it. So I was fortunate enough to get accepted at the University of Arizona out in Tucson, and made the trek out there and spent my full 12 months going once around the calendar as the head athletic trainer for a local high school while going to grad school.
So after Arizona,
now I'm going into the job market for the first time, and wouldn't you know that this fella by the name of Johnny Majors, who was at Pitt and had won a national championship, got hired at the University of Tennessee. And he took my mentor, my friend Tim Caron, with him. And about 2 weeks before graduation, I heard from Tim, and he said, why don't you come straight here from grad school and interview for my assistant's job? It just opened.
How about that?
And so somebody upstairs was looking out for me. I would say for most athletic trainers, they get comfortable somewhere and they lock in there and they put their family roots down there. But I was a little different. I moved a lot. And I think that, I told someone recently this, that, each time you move, I think you get to reinvent yourself a little bit.
That's well said.
You get to take all that you've learned at each place and then decide how you want to present yourself at the next place. So I always said my next move would be my best move. And when I left the University of Tennessee, I went to work. Well, I interviewed for a couple jobs, but then I ended up going to Oregon State University.
Now you're crisscrossing the country here.
Yes. So I went to work in Corvallis, by God, Oregon. And I had to look up where that was because it wasn't like on the beaten path. But so I got my first chance to be a head athletic trainer. I started as a head athletic trainer for football, and we had an older gentleman who was very experienced in athletic training. His name was Bill Robertson, and he was the head for basketball and kind of the head of the department. And short course into my first year there, I got there in March or April, and in November he passed away in the training room.
Oh my.
It was, yeah, that was a take your breath away type event. And we tried to settle that for 24, 48 hours and then had a meeting with the athletic director, and he offered me the job on the spot to take over the department. And I was pretty young. I was probably 25. So to be the head trainer at a Pac-10 school,
that's pretty significant.
At 25 years old was pretty good responsibility for me. And it was good. There was no internet then.
So you've been a head trainer since the age of 25 and
correct.
Every career after that.
Every spot after. Yep.
That's amazing, Kevin.
So I got to make my mistakes out there with them without most of them being in the news. Not right. saying none of them were, but most of them weren't. And so, there was a lot of learning, and there was a lot of managing things and managing people. And, you learn quickly in the profession that you're going to have an effect on some people's lives more so than others. There were players like at Tennessee. I had a very, very prominent football player that was highly recruited across the country that they landed. And the first summer, he went home and worked a summer job. He was from Americus, Georgia. And he ended up making a lot of money, but he worked in the sewer system. And he contracted a disease called Guillain-Barré. So he came back to campus. We went through our conditioning test, and nothing was normal. He was flopping when he ran. He didn't look balanced. He looked out of whack. We ended up doing a lot of tests and figuring out he had this Guillain-Barré, which can be fatal. So that guy didn't play football anymore.
Oh, no.
And that was a big blow to the program, obviously a huge blow to him and his family. But his nervous system, starting from the feet up, changed. I went to Oregon State. My second year there, we had a kid come in from the state of Washington. He was a freshman. He ran like a 5.8 40. And, the coaches are laughing. What the hell's this? We offered this kid a scholarship. And, I talked to the head coach. He goes, that's not normal. That's not right for that kid. So I brought him in, sat him down, said, tell me what you did this summer. I worked in the sewers. And guess what?
Oh, my. He contracted it too.
Now I have a new team physician. The first year I had one guy and he left. I had this new team physician. He'd been a neurologist practicing for many years. And he came in and said, well, what do you think's going on here? I said, I think he has Guillain-Barré. He said, you're an athletic trainer. How are you diagnosing Guillain-Barré? I said, I'm just telling you, I've been through this before, and I think the kid has it. And sure enough, he did. And that kid didn't play any more football either.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
And I don't think many people understand that not only is your position as a trainer just taking care of the physical welfare, but it often has to address the emotional, mental state of the athletes that you're working with. Wouldn't you say?
Certainly so. I mean, people can look at adversity. If you lose a big game, you have a big turnover, or if you do something as a player that, causes you some adversity, and maybe the team has that adversity. But then there's individual adversity, and some of the injuries that these players sustain are unique to having a major effect on their life. It takes them away from the group. They become alienated. They become frustrated. And it takes some counseling in addition to the rehab that they have to get, and how you can set little goals every day for them to do things to try to improve, to give them positive feedback. I used to tell them, you have to get 1% better every day, and in 100 days, we're going to get you where you need to be.
So you have to coordinate a multiplicity of different physicians in the realm of the athletic department per se, and particularly each sport and what it requires. You have to coordinate all these physicians and what their needs might be in terms of medicine, but also counselors, psychologists, religious staff members, whoever it might be. You're concerned about the welfare of the whole person, not just the physical.
Absolutely. And, I'm learning along the way too. So at Oregon State now, I'm the head athletic trainer. That we have an outstanding women's gymnastics program. But I'm looking at the injuries they're having, and I'm looking at the girls, and frankly, they looked undernourished. And we found out we had a big problem with anorexia and bulimia on that team. And we ended up having substantial amounts of counseling sessions, interventions, to try to get that corrected, to get that team back on track, because they were starving themselves to the extent that they were allowing their bodies to get injured because of it.
And so you really are, in many ways, can be considered a healer, not just of the physical, but the whole dimension of a person's personality, their character, and their pursuit of what they're looking for in life to achieve and succeed.
Yeah, and it doesn't end just with players either. Obviously,
your staff.
My staff, or coaches, or better yet, mentoring young athletic trainers
who want to follow you.
Because when I got to Oregon State, the last 10 students that had taken the certification exam to become athletic trainers hadn't passed.
Oh, no.
And I said, we're going to change how we're doing this, because they were all doing everything just by the hours. Well, I put in 5 hours today.
If you had to take a guess, because I don't want to go off on a tangent here, how many people that were trainers working with you, underneath you as your staff members, who have now either become head trainers at colleges or universities or in the National Football League, how many would you estimate?
Oh, more than 2 dozen, that have gone that high to become a head athletic trainer at a major place. Or a head athletic trainer in the NFL. At one point, I think I had 6 that were in the NFL.
6 out of 32?
Yeah.
That's quite an accomplishment.
And so, it's a blessing, and you're involved in their lives. And even today on the way here, I got one of my guys from FIU, which was one of my last stops, texted me about having an interview tomorrow with someone in the NFL. So, it doesn't stop.
So that ongoing mentoring relationship never ceases.
Never ceases.
People reach out to you not only for insight and understanding or suggestions or ideas, recommendations, all of that. You're like a library and a resource that is just filled with wisdom and experience.
Well, I think there's, I'm one of many. I'm one of many in my field that has, felt an obligation to help those coming after and to step up into that role and try to make sure that they get the right opportunity.
So after Corvallis, you then interviewed at
the University of Central Florida with a guy by the name of Lou Saban.
Wow.
And
Not Nick, but Lou. who had gone before to the University of Miami.
This is now early 80s, 83, going into 84. The economy's bad. Interest rates are 13%. There just isn't anything out in Oregon that was, beneficial for my wife and I at that time. I got married while I was there. And so we looked to make a move and found this job at UCF and made the transition. And I was there 1 year, and Lou left. And they had another turnover, and the next guy coming in came in from Florida State, and he wanted to bring his own trainer in. And so I put my feelers out and was fortunate enough to get an interview at the University of Miami, and that's how that job occurred.
So you were at the university from 1985 until you left for the Dallas Cowboys in 1988. Correct? 89. Your first year with the Cowboys was 1989.
Yes.
And I had the privilege of baptizing both of your daughters,
right.
Mackenzie and Caitlin.
Correct.
So we have been tied together now for many years, all those years, and we've stayed in contact. So you leave the University of Miami. You got a national championship ring in 1987
right.
with the University of Miami. And then Coach Jimmy Johnson takes you and others, but he specifically takes you and goes to the Dallas Cowboys.
And that was, a whole nother realm, to leave college athletics, which I had worked in then for about 12 or 13 years, and to uproot and go to Dallas and take a shot at seeing if I could figure out how to do this in the NFL. And that was a big learning curve.
Your first year, you only won one game.
Yeah. But, Jimmy came into my office and tossed me a book, and it was it was the collective bargaining agreement between the NFL players and the NFL Management Council. And he said, I can't be the only one to learn this. You need to know this. And so I started studying.
And I have to interrupt you. I could tell anyone who's listening or viewing, I have never met anyone in my life who knows the rules of the NFL and the collective bargaining agreement as well as you do. No one.
Well, when your boss tells you better know it,
you better know
it. You better learn it. And so, years later, I was in a staff meeting with Nick Saban, and he said, well, we're going to do this with this player. And I said, well, you could do that, Coach, but he's going to be exposed to the other teams at that point. And he said, no, he won't be. I said, as of the 6th Tuesday of the season, that's the trade deadline, I said, any player subject to claim. Doesn't matter if they're a veteran or if they're a rookie or what it is, they're now subject to be claimed by other teams. That's the rules. Well, how the hell do you know? I said, well, I
read the book.
I had to learn those. And so, sure enough, they checked, and the player was eligible to be claimed.
Which only verifies the fact that in your role and your position, there's no substitute for knowledge.
Well, it's like, how can you go to work and not know the rules of the trade if that's the job you're in? You better have someone that knows them every day right next to you if you don't know them yourself.
And what I always say about people in the profession, the healing profession, whatever it is, I don't care how much you know until I know how much you care. And what has made you the trainer that I've always admired and respected, plus those who worked with you and the players who benefited from your leadership and your tendency towards making sure they were at their best performance level, was the fact that you were such an empathetic, healing person. You took an interest personally in them. You wanted to know what was going on in their personal life. You did everything you could to just make sure you were taking care of the whole person.
I think that's, it's similar to what you do with people. It's similar to, if you're a great physician, you do the same thing. You have to know that there are many factors affecting this player or / patient, and how are you going to help manage those factors if you put your head in the sand and don't think something's going on at home or something's going on with a roommate or a girlfriend or something else is happening. All those things can affect performance.
Correct.
I've had players come to me and say, can you talk to my wife and I? We're struggling. We can't conceive. We've been doing this, and find out that, that the wife was an athlete and she had amenorrhea and had disruptions of her menstrual cycles and things that had to be done to get her back normalized, and then they did conceive. And so, you know,
you got a whole panorama of not just taking care of the individual, but every element that surrounds that athlete.
I had a coach call me, had been with me and then moved on to another team, but his family stayed in South Florida, and he called me. He said, "Hey, I need the best breast cancer doctor in South Florida right now." I said, "You got a pen?"
That is one of the most amazing things I have ever discovered about you. When I needed a resource to a physician of any specialty, whatever it was, you had an incredible listing of all the best physicians, surgeons, medical treatment, whatever the need might be, whatever the requirement was, whatever, you name it. So after the Cowboys, and you spent how many years with the Dallas Cowboys? 7 years with the Dallas Cowboys, and you won three Super Bowl rings.
Pretty blessed, yeah.
That is amazing. So you got a national championship ring from the University of Miami, 3 Super Bowl rings with the Dallas Cowboys, back-to-back, and then Jimmy left the Cowboys, retired, and then Barry Schweitzer came in.
Yeah, and that was a challenging time because his management style was so significantly different than Jimmy's, and the players took full advantage. I mean, it was a free-for-all in some regards. And you know, probably that Super Bowl that we won with him, I was more involved with than the other two in terms of I set the practice schedules, I set what the calendar was going to be in the lead up to the game, and I thought we needed some extra, and I put it in there.
That's why I think the reason why you and Coach Jimmy Johnson have always had such a close relationship is because he always admired and respected you for how organized you were, how meticulous you were in doing your job. He always, I know personally, saw you as a person he could trust to consult with, that was going to give him insights and information that no one else was privy to.
Well, you know, you look at Jimmy, and I would have to say he's the smartest guy that I ever worked for.
That's quite a compliment.
And I was blessed to work with him at multiple places, 3 different places. And that wasn't by accident because I knew how smart he was. But he told me early on, we had a meeting, and I said, why are we going to run this 12-minute run as a conditioning test? And he said, well, that's what we run. I said, well, it's not a football test. I said, that's an aerobic kind of a distance runner's test. I said, football is a game of short bursts. There's better tests. I like this 110 test that we do. And
so you were the one that recommended the 110 test. Oh, those Cowboys must love you for that. If they knew who was responsible for that, you'd be off their Christmas card list.
Well, we started doing it at the University of Miami, but here's what he told me. He said, listen, I can't tell you what to do every day in your job. You know it better than I do. But I want your best. I want the best you have. So if you got something, you better bring it to me. And that started a really great relationship for me to be able to go to him and say, please look at this. Please think about this. Could this help us?
See, I think that was one of the most amazing things about his style of leadership. He sought input from everybody that was surrounding him in an organization, whether it was the University of Miami, whether it was the Dallas Cowboys, or later with the Miami Dolphins. He treasured the information he would get from even the janitor, whoever it might be, he saw as a resource that he wanted to tap into.
There's no doubt about it, and that's what I think, you know, when he went to school for industrial psychology. Obviously, he applied many of those methods to coaching and even to how he managed the media. You know, my career, probably 30 of the years that I worked with people out of that same nucleus of group that I met so long ago with Jimmy, you know. Ended up working for Coach Wanstead, ended up working for Butch Davis. Just, you know, similar setup, how they wanted to do things, how we could communicate, how we got things done.
Now, I'm going to talk about something else. When Jimmy's first year with the Miami Dolphins, they have in Indianapolis, because it's more or less the center of this country, what they call the NFL Combines.
Right.
And all these potential draft choices from all the colleges and universities in the United States get invited for this incredible buffet, if you will, a variety of tests and measurements of physical, mental, emotional levels and results. Tell them a little bit what that demands of you as a trainer and the kind of testing that goes on there.
Well, the whole premise of the combine started for the league to be able to give physical exams to these potential incoming athletes, because let's face it, a number of them go to college and have significant injuries there. And so to be able to put a value on where their health is going into the draft gives you an indication as far as how much risk or lack of risk the player may have and what are you willing to accept. As I explained one time to Coach Saban, he said, well, you're going to flunk this guy. And I said, well, I'm going to put a very high risk grade on him. If the reward of having him outweighs the risk I'm telling you, then that's a decision you have to make. He said, well, you're putting it all on me. I said, well, that's why they're paying you millions. I said, I don't know how good the player is. I only can speak to what his health is. You have to put the whole package together and make a decision whether what I'm telling you is too restrictive or acceptable in terms of the quality of player you're going to get. So
through all this very intensive testing, you got orthopedic surgeons looking at joints that have been operated on before or injured, and all the battery of exams that these prospective draft choices, which is going to be a huge investment for an NFL team, they want to get as much possible medical, physical information as they possibly can to make an informed decision.
Right.
I'll bet, no doubt, that you found that some of these athletes had diseases or sicknesses or problems they heretofore had no knowledge of.
Unbelievably, yes, we did. And some of them were cardiovascular in nature, where they had some congenital issues with their heart. Some of them were, you plowed up something and found out someone had a tumor in their brain, or someone had some other kind of disease that was affecting how their nervous system was working, and what were you going to do with those risks? You can't flunk everybody, but you can sure put high risk grades on people and decide when and where you might invest in that player.
So just the discovery of some of these athletes who had these diseases or illnesses they were unaware of, you might have saved people's lives.
Well, I learned a lot because obviously I didn't know every disease in the book going in there. And so come out and say, this guy has this. Well, here I am now searching out what that means and what's the long-term prognosis for that and what does it mean for a guy in his age group. How are we going to present this to our management, to our coaches, to our scouts, to where they understand what we're talking about, because we plowed up a snake at the combine.
So after the combines, the next venue is everybody sits down, scouts, coaches, head coach, and all the other staff that have been gathering and collecting information about athletes. Tell them about the process of going through and evaluating each and every prospective draft choice and what that entails.
Well, I think that, from my end, everyone got a medical grade.
Okay.
But they also got a grade as a player from the scouting department. So they looked at their abilities, what was their quickness compared to others? What was their straight line speed compared to others? How strong were they compared to others? And they developed a grade for that player. And so
there's a medical grade, there's an athletic grade.
Right. Then, there's other things that come into play. Was the guy mentally tough? Was the guy having any other medical or mental, emotional type issues that were affecting his play? And so there could be numerous things that you would end up making notes on for one person as they prepared for their draft.
I see. Well, we have much more to discuss, and we're going to do that in our second podcast. We've got more things to talk about from the realm of your perspective. Healing, finding your purpose in life. Kevin O'Neill, you've done that. You have found something that has helped you gain not only the esteem and the respect of everybody else that I know in professional football and amongst those in college. And I want to commend you for the life you've lived, not only for what you've done, but for what you've given. Thank you.
Thank you.